Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features editor, Jennifer Famico Cahill. Welcome, guys.
Hi, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing?
Pretty good. Today feels like a holiday. There's an inauguration going on, and there's sunshine, and I see some rainbows out there, and it actually feels like a good day. But that's tempered somewhat by, what we
By
are
us. Just say it. By us.
tempered by us. Yeah, the news that gets reported every once in a while has to do with things that aren't quite so sunny. So with that, I would say, Thad, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're covering this week?
Yeah, so our cover story this week is about, I guess, a ray of potential sunshine in the COVID conversation, but one that still appears very far off. So we dove into the world of vaccine distribution and kind of looking at what folks locally can expect and some of the very formidable challenges public health and local healthcare institutions face in getting 70 to 80% of the local population vaccinated, which is what's really going to be needed to kind of return some semblance of normal here.
So in your cover story, you kind of like the subheading talks about how it's a steep climb ahead for us to reach that point where all 135 or so thousand of our residents are, or the critical mass, 80% of them are vaccinated, so that we have some degree of a comfort zone. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the vaccination to date, how it's unfolded, maybe some of the complications?
Yeah, so I think as most people are probably aware that this process started out with wanting to vaccinate kind of frontline healthcare workers first. And so there's about 10,000 of those in Humboldt County. And that's, this effort is a month old now. The first vaccination in Humboldt was given, I think, December 14th. And it has been a slow roll. And part of that is due to just the rate at which vaccines are arriving in Humboldt County, doses. It's important for everybody to remember with the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, it does require 2 doses to get immunity. So when we're talking about a shipment of, 1,000 or 2,000 doses, that doesn't mean that it, fully immunizes 1,000 or 2,000 people. That's just kind of gets them halfway there. So what we try to do in the story is really illustrate kind of that on the one hand, this entire process is really dependent on the rate at which vaccines are made available to the state of California and then in turn Humboldt. But then also that there's just really logistical challenges of getting the kind of the general population vaccinated. So over the past month, I think that public health has administered about 7,500, I think a little bit less than that, doses of vaccine to healthcare workers. And I think it's important for folks to realize that this is the easiest population to vaccinate because essentially public health just determines how many healthcare workers that qualify for the vaccine work at each local healthcare provider and then deliver those doses, and then the healthcare providers or institutions vaccinate their own, which is a much simpler process than, say, once it gets open up to school teachers. And then public health has to figure out not only how to identify all the school teachers in Humboldt County, but then also how to get those people to a qualified vaccination center, whether that's their primary care provider or a clinic from public health. And of course, we're doing all this in the midst of a pandemic, so it's not as simple as packing everybody into a singular school auditorium and lining them up single file and vaccinating them. There's distancing and all these other things that need to come into play.
So there's Moderna and there's Pfizer so far. These are the approved vaccines that have been distributed. But you noted in your article that there was a potential risk to one of them that may have impacted the number of doses available to us. Do you just want to comment on that briefly so people can hear kind of the facts related to it?
Yeah, definitely. There's been a lot of, I think, semi-hysteria about
Right.
this news. And so what happened is there was a vaccination clinic down in San Diego County where they vaccinated thousands of people. I'm not sure the exact number, but it was multiple thousands of people with this one batch of Moderna vaccines. And within that, about 10 people had or reported having very adverse allergic reactions. And so, in the realm of vaccine safety, that's kind of an alarming number. That's a disproportionate number, and it's cause for concern. But it's also not as though most people, or even, a really significant number of people who got that vaccine, or a significant percentage of people who got that vaccine, had an adverse reaction. But it was enough that the state and the company Moderna decided they needed to investigate. And so what they've done is they've asked all providers to hold off on giving any more doses from that specific batch of Moderna vaccines until they learn more, until they really kind of get to the bottom of what happened in San Diego and whether they feel like this very specific batch of the Moderna vaccine is safe to continue administering. And how that impacts Humboldt County, unfortunately, is that this was 90% of the doses that Humboldt County Public Health has on hand, so has here in the county, are from that batch. And so, this week there's a lot of excitement that they're going to start opening up vaccines to the 75 and older demographic and really move on to the next phase of distribution. And that basically is on hold at this point. They had several vaccination clinics that they were going to schedule for this week for that demographic that are now kind of on hold indefinitely until they either get more batches of vaccine that are from Pfizer or from other Moderna batches. Or the state decides that this batch really is safe and that they get the all clear to continue vaccinating.
Cool. Thanks for clearing that up a little bit.
Yeah, but I think it's also important for folks to remember. I mean, we're talking about, a couple, I think 2,000 or 3,000 doses of the vaccine in this Moderna batch. And while rightfully, I mean, every dose is important at this point, we want to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible. I think a larger takeaway from the story is that to really get to that, 70, 85% threshold in Humboldt County by late summer, which is kind of the target, we're going to have to reach a point where we're vaccinating 8,000 people a week or delivering 8,000 doses of vaccine a week. And we're really, really far from that. And so I think while there's understandably tons of excitement about the vaccine, being the thing that puts us on this road out of this pandemic and back to normal life where we can, commingle and go to a movie or go to the gym or whatever it is we do, and that hope remains, I think it's important for folks to recognize that this is a long road, and if we get there by late summer, then that will be a good thing. But really, I mean, Dr. Hoffman in a press conference about the vaccine, our local health officer said, that, and realistically, it might be into next year before that happens. And then there's some uncertainty about exactly what the vaccine guarantees long term. And he warned that, there's some health officials who feel like masks are going to be a regular part of our lives, at least in winter months, for some years to come. So there's lots of reason for excitement, but I also think it needs to be tempered a bit.
Yeah, I think it's hard for those of us who have been watching outbreak movies all of our lives. And the denouement where they deliver the vaccine is about 4 minutes, and it's a brief montage, and then everybody's fine and nobody has to think about it anymore. And it's just not the reality that we're living with. And, I think that the push from, on high about how the vaccine is going to make masks unnecessary, all that stuff, that information has to be, kind of reset, and the messaging, it's hard to get a message out to the public that we may not be able to just go, back to normal with, like you were saying, commingling, dinner parties, and people who aren't me hugging and going to gyms. All that stuff is going to take time. And, everybody needs to stay vigilant until we're there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely right. And I think another thing that I hope folks take away from the story is that, I think because of false expectations and some other things and just the inherent hope that's in this vaccine, I think there has been some frustration directed at public health, Humboldt County Public Health and local healthcare providers about the way this process is unfolded. And, maybe some of that is founded, maybe some of it isn't. But I think it's important for folks to know that, the degree of federal and state support for this effort is really dropping off these shipments of vaccines in Humboldt County. There have been, to date, there's no additional resources that have come into the county. There's no funds. There's no healthcare workforce that's been sent up here from the state or from the feds. And so, you have public health, which has very understandably been up to their proverbial eyeballs in dealing with just COVID response of making sure hospital capacity is increased and testing capacity and all these other functions. And while they have been planning for vaccine rollout for some time, it's in addition to everything else they're doing. And similarly, hospitals and open door clinics and stuff now have to figure out a way to administer vaccines in the course of caring for sick patients and doing all the other things they normally do. And so, I think people want to think, well, how hard is it to, stick a needle in somebody's arm and send them on their way? It's a much heavier lift than that. And, and I think from my impression of talking to folks on the front lines of this is, they're working really hard trying to figure it out, but it's not as easy as some people want to think it is.
Thank you for that. You did definitely cover the areas I thought were really important. There's so much more in your article, including a really interesting and clear graphic about the potential timeline of the phases of eligibility for who could be getting vaccinated and when. But also, like you said, you can't just do what we do with like food pantry, where people line up their cars and drive through, or even testing for that matter, because you need 15 minutes observing people to make sure there's no allergic reaction, that kind of thing. So there's sort of logistical challenges. You also mentioned there's a little bit of hope in theory that this new administration may devote resources to helping buffer up the new federal administration of the new president could help bolster funds in theory to kind of facilitate the heavy demand of the administration.
Yeah, and certainly there's, the providers I spoke to and the local officials I spoke to hold that hope. They feel like that at least the Biden administration has pledged in its first 100 days to bring a lot of resources to bear to this effort. And so, I think there's at least cautious optimism that'll come through, and some of the, just help building out this infrastructure to make these efforts more streamlined will come to bear.
Well, fantastic. Like I said, so much more in there. How about we pivot to what else you're covering this week? That another COVID-related story about a resident in the Arcata community.
Yeah, so we got some very sad news over the weekend that Esteban Gonzalez, who was the proprietor, owner, and chef and counter worker and everything else at Esteban's Mexican restaurant in Arcata, as well as a couple of taco trucks locally, passed away on January 12th. And, first and foremost, I'll just say for me, this hit close to home. I've been a long, loyal customer of Esteban's for a long time, and really came to appreciate him in a different way. I have to say, once I started bringing my daughter to his shop and saw the way he interacted with her, and they kind of came to adore each other, and he became one of her favorite people in Humboldt County. And then I got the good fortune to interview him for a story I did a handful of years ago, and really learned about his backstory, which is really remarkable. He was born into poverty in Mexico City, one of, I think, 5 kids. His dad passed away when he was 7, and he was a very young man, I think 19, decided that he needed to try to get to the United States if he was going to kind of help lift his family out of poverty, and just really started a kind of an amazing journey. It's a testament to to belief in being able to find something better, and just really hard work. And at 19, he decided that he kind of realized if he was really going to make a better life for himself and his family, that he couldn't do it in Mexico City and needed to move north. And so he moved to Tijuana and was homeless, kind of trying to save up enough money to hire a coyote to smuggle him across the border for a while, and then ultimately ended up in Fortuna, where an uncle lived. And he talked to me about kind of a spell where he was homeless, trying to get his footing here in Humboldt County. He was working 3 jobs. He'd get up every day by 3 to go milk cows at a dairy. And then by 8 a.m., he was starting his sawmill shift, which he worked all day at the sawmill. And then every night went to wash dishes at a local restaurant until 10 or later. Kind of did this every day until he could save up enough money to first move his family up. Well, I guess he became a U.S. citizen in 1993, and then started moving his family up here. And then at some point bought a taco truck, which then he turned into 2 taco trucks, and then eventually saved up enough money to open a brick and mortar restaurant in Arcata. So just a really incredible story of hard work and perseverance.
And somebody who took, somebody who did not pull the ladder up behind him, right, but who gave and was generous to people who were down on their luck. used to give discounts or free food to people, students. And one gentleman that Thad spoke to was for a while young and homeless, and talked about how Mr. Gonzalez would feed him and look after him, and even kept up with him when he kind of got his life together and, went to school. And I'm going to just keep it together. Thad, say something.
Yeah. I spoke to William Brooke, who I think had said he'd known Esteban since he was 14. And yeah, just a really endearing story of how, Will became homeless, and that Esteban just really went out of his way to not just feed him, but he had this wonderful story of how he called the taco truck one time to see if it was opened or where it was. And that kind of unbeknownst to him, Esteban wrote down his phone number and then would call him to check up on him from time to time and make sure he was doing okay. And then, when Will eventually went off to college, he would call and check in on him there. And, I think Esteban's death, I mean, to me, I knew him through my very limited lens of having interviewed him and kind of having heard his kind of incredible story. And then just seeing him, when I went into the shop with my daughter, and really appreciating kind of his positive attitude and what a wonderful person he was on that level. But, in the wake of his passing, to read through social media posts and hear other people's experiences with him, I just realized that, what I saw of him was just the tip of the iceberg. And he was not only just kind of being this ray of positivity in all kinds of people's lives, but really going out of his way to just connect with people and lift them up wherever he could. It's just a huge loss.
And while we're unable to confirm independently whether or not his death was related to COVID, I feel like this is probably a good time to remind people that frontline workers, not just healthcare workers, but food service and other customer service workers, are constantly exposed to your potential viral loads, and wear a mask and keep your distance, follow their rules, and don't give them any crap about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, touching stories about how he's impacted people's lives. They say so much that this guy was one of those people who lived, Esteban lived, he walked the walk, and gave away the food to people if they needed it, and cared, truly, truly cared. So, I mean, I think it would be an honor to tribute to just try to remember that, let him be that positive example for people to respect and appreciate people in our lives that sometimes we overlook.
Absolutely. Yeah. As somebody I interviewed, Scott Greason, said for the story, is just, he was the best of us. And I think that's very true. And I think it's, we can all kind of honor that by trying to emulate a little bit of Esteban and be that ray of positivity in our own circles and our own orbits.
Thank you for that. It was very touching, and rightfully so. Jennifer, hopefully it's okay now to pivot over to you and hear a little bit about what you're covering in the Arts and Features feed this week.
I'm back. You can come back to me.
Okay, cool.
So this week, similar actually to how Esteban's worked, there are a couple of restaurants that I've been looking at, or about more than a couple, over the last 9 months, and seeing how some businesses are surviving through the financial pressures of COVID. And, trucks have been keeping their heads above water, and really small operations. It's, think about how, remember we talked about the restaurants like Campground and Plaza that were, struggling with how do we shut down and then get back on our feet again after like a staff member tests positive, or how do we adjust to opening dining, closing dining, all those changes every time. That takes its toll on a business. But some businesses that have managed to keep their heads above water that are not trucks are really small operations. And I looked this week at a couple of, honestly, my favorites. I love La Trattoria in Arcata. If you haven't been, it's fantastic. It's my gnocchi. It's the gnocchi.
Right on.
And also, and that is run by a husband and wife. and it's Patricia Kambianika and her husband Jim Becker, and she's the only one in the kitchen. She does all the cooking. He does some prep. Apparently, he'll make some meatballs, etc. But he mostly does serving and the books and things like that. And they have one employee, and her name is Beverly Matthews, and she's been with them for quite a while. And the three of them run a restaurant. That's the whole thing. And they have been turning out dinners, doing curbside only, and keeping, they have their own personal health issues, some issues that would make them not ready to serve in such a tiny room in particular. And their room is so tiny, if you've ever been there, that they'd be able to have maybe 2 tables. Yeah. And it's just not worth it. And then you need serving staff, and so by keeping their operations really, really small into a 3-person operation, they're able to make ends meet. They're in the black during COVID, which is astounding. They didn't do payroll protection plan loans, partly because I don't know that they even would have qualified given their status, and that they normally only have about 4 employees. But down to 3, they were like, okay, this is not for us. We'll just go forth. And they had a steady enough clientele, a really dedicated bunch of customers that were regulars, and that helped keep them afloat. And everybody has just been, so happy to have them that, when I talked to Jim Becker, he was just saying that, like, it's actually been a really great experience having this kind of community feeling with their customers. Likewise, over in Eureka, a Taste of BIM, which if you haven't been to a Taste of BIM, you should go. It's fantastic. You know what? We have a Jamaican Madam Vice President now. So now is your time to explore Caribbean food. That's a really good excuse to do it. But they have wonderful Caribbean dishes, Bahamian, and it's a very kind of a niche little restaurant over kind of just off the beaten path in Old Town. But they've been able to thrive because, not thrive, like they're not, rolling in cash over there, but they are able to keep their head above water because it's just the owner, Gabby Long, and her mom in the kitchen. Oh. And they are the ultimate pod because they live together, they work together, and it's just the 2 of them. And beyond that, they are just passing bags of food through a door and, getting signatures on credit card receipts. So they are as protected as they can be, and they are protecting their customers as much as they can be protected in their interactions. And it's allowing them to make ends meet. And it's giving me hope. It's giving me life. And if you go, they will give you very good jerk chicken wings.
Right on. And they did in your article, you talk about a little bit of hope for the near future, that maybe they'll get back into some events, providing food for events. So they really are doing, at least have a vision for how they can do well.
I think a lot of what restaurants are going to go through is going to depend on, Thad's earlier story about vaccination. Yeah. And being able to keep going with the way that they've adapted.
Well, right on, guys. Thank you. Sorry that this was so COVID heavy this week, but that's the nature of the beast. I guess that's what we're living through. And these were some really interesting stories. And I definitely want to dive in and read more. So thank you. That's just about going to do it for us this week. North Coast Journal on newsstands now. Pick one up. Stay informed. Go online. They're online. You can find them online. Everybody, stay healthy. Stay safe. Thad, Jennifer, thank you so much. We'll see you guys again next week.
See you next week.
Thanks, Dan.